Okay, good evening. Right, I think it's time. So let's begin. So Parshas Vayeitzei, really, there's an unusual situation here with Parshas Vayeitzei in the sense that because there is a very small parsha that is in between the Parshas Toldus and Parshas Vayeitzei, it almost escapes our attention. But actually, it's very, very problematic. Understanding what it's doing there, and the point about this little parsha is it really can set the tone, and it can be understood as being really fundamentally important to understanding this entire parsha. And that is what exactly is going on with the parsha at the end of Parshas Toldos, the last few psukim. And what you have there is basically Yitzchak and Rivka sending away Yaakov. Perachov ches posuk vov vayar Esav. Esav saw kivirach Yitzchak es Yaakov v'shalachas v'beden Aram. He sees that he's sent him away to take for himself a wife, etc., etc. And then Yaakov listened, vayar, and that Yaakov listened. Vayar Esav kiros b'nus Canaan be'en Yitzchak aviv. Vayelech Esav el Yishmael. And Esav goes to Yishmael and he marries Machalas bas Yishmael ben Avraham, achos Nevoyos, the sister of Nevoyos, al Noshav lo leishol. Right? He marries daughter of Yishmael, her name was Machalas. And then look, you see at the beginning of this week's parsha, Pasuk Yud, Vayeitzei Yaakov ben Beersheva elech Choron. Now, Yaakov left Beersheva and went to Choron. Now, Rashi, of course, picks up on this unusual, the unusual positioning of the description of Yaakov's of Esav's family, right, and Esav's marriage. Rashi says the very first Rashi in the parsha, before the one that everyone is very familiar with, which is the fact that Yaakov leaves, and when a tzaddik leaves a place, then it leaves an impression. The Rashi before that, which seems quite descriptive, Rashi says that since the daughters of Canaan were clearly negative in Yitzchak's eyes, and therefore Esav went to Yishmael. That's why the parsha interrupted the story of Yaakov. And once it's finished, once it's finished that story, Chozar le'inyan harisha, and it goes back to the original. It goes back to the original story, and the story of Yaakov. So the difficulty here is obvious. Is why does the Torah interrupt to tell us the story of Esav's wife, why Esav marrying? Seems to be completely out of place. And it seems to be unnecessary for the thrust of the story. That's the most important point. It interrupts the piece. And I do think this is something that we miss because it's literally in between end of Toldus and the beginning of Vayeitzei. So we miss the piece. We miss the point here. Now, we're familiar with the very long Rashi at the end of Parshas Toldus, which deals with this issue to a certain extent, or attempts to, based on the complicated calculations in terms of the age of Yishmael. Because we know how old Yishmael was, we know that it all based on the fact that he marries Nevoyos. Machalas bas Yishmael was not married to Nevoyos, she was the sister of Nevoyos. We learn from there that basically Yishmael had died, and therefore his Nevoyos, her brother, was marrying her off. And therefore, you can calculate Yishmael's age, and from that you can calculate Yaakov's age, and you can work out that he spent 14 years in yeshiva. But you can understand that it is still difficult. It is still difficult that we need to insert this entire parsha to work out that particular calculation. There is a very, very beautiful idea suggested by the Be'er Yosef Tzvi of Yosef Tzvi Salant. And he says the following, he makes the following point. He brings a Gemara in Sanhedrin. The Gemara in Sanhedrin says that David HaMelech said to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, said to Hashem, why do we say Elokei Avram, Elokei Yitzchak, Elokei Yaakov, but we don't say Elokei David? We don't say Elokei David. Why can't I be in Shmona Esra? That was the question that David HaMelech asked Hashem. And the answer is given in very cryptic language. Omar, he said, Hashem responded, Inhu minsuli. They were tested by me and they overcame. Va'at lo minsavasli. But you were never tested by me to the same extent that they were. So Gemara in Sanhedrin Kuf Zayin Omad Aleph. Now, we understand, says the Be'er Yosef, that Avram had the 10 tests. They are Sarah students. Yitzchak was tested with the Akedah above all else. When it comes to Yaakov, it's not exactly clear which specific test is being referred to. We know that Yaakov had a very difficult life. We know that he had Toras after Toras. We know that all the way through the entire story, through to Yosef and everything else. We're aware of that. But at the end of the day, it is not entirely clear that in what respect, what was the key test that Yaakov passed, if you like, or that Yaakov represents, that when Hashem says all of the three forefathers were tested by me and they overcame, what exactly was that? And Rav Yosef Tzvi Salan suggests as follows. He says that it could be that Yaakov's test was the very same test that Moshe Rabbeinu, the same dilemma that Moshe had, and that others had in Tanakh as well, Asaf, Chabakuk. And that is the question of Tzadik, Viralo, Rosh V'Tovlo. How you can have a situation where a righteous individual, someone who pleases completely a Tzadik, everything, negative things happen to them, and someone who is a Rosha, who is wicked, positive things happen to them. That eternal question of Tzadik, Viralo, Rosh V'Tovlo. That was the test of Yaakov. And where do you see that? Because Yaakov and Esav are two brothers. They are two brothers. And because they're two brothers, a number of the suggested responses to that question, that theological question of why do good things happen to bad people, why do bad things happen to good people, the Gemara in Brachos suggests a number of possible avenues to understand it. But none of them work. None of them work with Yaakov and Esav. The idea of there being a distinction, well, one was a tzaddik ben tzaddik, and one was a tzaddik ben Rosha, one was descended from, maybe it's to do with negative ancestors, the Gemara in Brachos says. Maybe that's the reason. Doesn't work. They're two brothers, they're twins, they're both children of the same parents. Another suggestion given in the Gemara is that there's no response. Maybe he wasn't. Maybe Esav really had hidden good deeds. But you can't say that either, because here we know Esav's life story. We know how he behaved. We know the fact that just how wicked he became. And Yaakov is the entire opposite. Ish Tom Yoshev Oholim. He is the one who epitomizes tzidkus of righteousness. And yet, Yaakov suffers so much. And he particularly suffers in the area of marriage, in the area of trying to find a wife, and the whole story of Rachel and Leah, and we know what transpires. Now, until this point, this is where it's such a powerful idea. Until this point in Yaakov's life, he was living a private life. He really hadn't gone out beyond the tent. He hadn't gone into the wider world. He was entirely within the family unit. He steps outside to find his life partner, his soulmate. How hard does he have to work? He has to work 7 years, and even after the 7 years, he's given the wrong one, and we know, and then he gets to marry Rachel, and has to work another 7 years after that. And yet, he looks at his brother, Esav, who has done so many things wrong. He's been running after, as we know, all of the local women in Canaan for years and years. And as soon as he wants to choose and select a particular wife, Ben Arboim Shana, he's 40 years old. He chooses who he's able to marry. He goes and wants to marry Machalas, the daughter of Ishmael. No problem. It's all in completely smooth. Everything is smooth going for Esav. When the moment when Yaakov wants to go to Padan Aram, Esav goes to Ishmael and marries Machalas. Al Noshav Lo Le'Ishmael, without any effort at all. And this is the moment when the Torah inserts this passage to explain to us, before we begin the story of Yaakov and the trials and tribulations he has over finding his wife and everything that transpires. The Torah tells us that this was Yaakov's primary trial. This was his test. Even though it would seem so appropriate and correct, and according to the way things should play out, that he should be the one to have it plain sailing when it came to finding a wife, and yet it is the opposite. His brother has that, and despite all of this, despite that dilemma in faith and emunah which must have posed to him, He serves Hashem completely, faithfully, b'chol liboy v'nafshoy, as the phrase is used by the Be'er Yosef. His emunah and his bitachon was strong in Hashem. Not because he has the answer, not because he has the answer to this question. He doesn't have the answer. He doesn't know how to answer it. As famously Hashem himself responds to Eov, who the entire book of Eov, the entire Sefer of Eov, struggles with this question, the question of why do good things happen to bad people, why do bad things happen to good people? And there are no answers. There aren't answers. There aren't answers to that question on earth. Hashem answers Eov from the whirlwind and says, do you possibly understand? Is it possible for you to understand everything? No. And just like you can't understand everything, so you can't understand this either. Many of you may have seen, well, there was a short clip that went around, one of the last pieces that Rabbi Sachs spoke about before he passed away. It was just, I think, a few weeks. It was before he passed away. It was a video interview. It's only a minute and a half long. You can find it on YouTube. It's incredibly powerful. And he's asked the interviewer asked this question, why is it? Why is the bad things happen to good people? And he says such a profound words. He says that Hashem doesn't want us to understand, because if we did understand, if we understood, we would give up trying to fight the negativity in this world. It is a struggle that we are constantly faced with, that we cannot understand why it is that bad things happen to good people, good things happen to bad people. It is a constant struggle of our existence. The Be'er Yosef understands that the insertion of this parsha, the story, the little bit about Esau and who he married, is there to contrast with Yaakov's struggles. A very, very powerful idea. Yaakov has to accept that and has to have the emunah and bitachon that goes with it. But there is another piece I think we can link to this. Another piece, because the question we always ask ourselves when we're faced with this type of, if you like, theological question, this incredibly difficult problem to understand. How do we cope in practice? What is the practical advice? What is the practical way of coping? And in this too, I think we have a key message, a code almost, in this week's parsha, in Parshas Vayeitzei. This is based on an idea presented by Chaim Shmulevitz and Sichos Musa. He says like this. He says that the Balei HaTosfos al HaTorah and also the Baal HaTurim, they point out the fact that Parshas Vayeitzei is a Parsha Stuma. If you look at Parshas Vayeitzei from beginning to end, there are no Suchos and Stuma, there are no Parshas. It's one long continuous piece. It is one, the columns go from the beginning to the end, except for the very, very last few Psukim, the Maftir, where it talks about Yaakov coming back to the land of Israel. But the rest of the Parsha is one continuous narrative without any breaks at all. And the problem is, and they say the reason is because Yaakov ran away from his brother Esau in secret. Because he ran away in secret, so it's reflected by the fact that it was all in secret, in haste, and therefore there's the Parsha is not divided up in the Torah. Problem is, of course, as we know, that the main reason Chazal say that the Torah itself has parshas at all, has paragraphs, if you like, is because to give Moshe Rabbeinu a chance to breathe, if you like, between parsha and the parsha. However we understand that. But even, the fact is why is it that just because he's running away from Esau, therefore we can't have a break at all in Parshas Vayeitzei? Says Reb Chaim Shmulevitz as follows. He says that there is a pasuk in Yeshayahu, Perek Mem, pasuk Chov Zayin. It's actually the Haftarah, beginning of the Haftarah for Parshas Lech Lecha. Lomo Soymar Yaakov. Why should you speak Yaakov or Sudaber Yisrael and Yisrael speak Nister Odorchai Me Hashem, to say that my ways are hidden from Hashem? And Chazal say on that, it's a Medrash in Bereshis Rabbah. Me'olam lo Omar Yaakov Dovo Botel Elokan. This was the only negative, this was the only statement which was void, so to speak, that came out of Yaakov's mouth. Hashem responded to him, Omar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Ani osok l'hamliches b'noi. I'm involved with ensuring that his son is crowned king. His son eventually becomes a king, becomes effectively a ruler in Mitzrayim. V'hu omer. And he says to me, Hashem says that, Yaakov, you say to me, Loma hariyosem li, why have you done all these bad things to me? That's what it means when it says, why do you say, Yaakov, my ways are hidden? Nisrod Rochaim Hashem, my ways are hidden from Hashem. Effectively, says Reb Chaim Shmulevitz, the claim, the argument that Hashem has against, so to speak, Yaakov, is the fact that Yaakov is looking at the individual instances, the events that transpire in his life as in and of themselves, as separate, distinct incidences. And when he looks at each one by itself, he says, this is awful. This is terrible. How can this happen? You can imagine 7 years work and then he tricks him, right? It's awful. It's horrific. It's horrendous. But Hashem's response to him is never to look at the event in and of itself, the prat. Never look at that event in life, any event in life, in and of itself, as it exists in this moment. Because when you look at the broader context, that is the only way that specific things can begin to make more sense. Only at the broader picture can you begin to understand the details. Everything Hashem responds to Yaakov, it's a beautiful medrash. Everything Hashem is saying to Yaakov, all these things you don't understand, it's one destination. Eventually, I'm going to make sure that your son becomes king. The Vilna Gaon wrote a letter, famously, Igeres Hagra, to his family when he left. He was on his way to Eretz Yisrael, never actually made it. I think he got as far as Germany, but he wrote a letter to his family. And there's a line in that letter which says as follows. He says, L'mochar tivka. He says, tomorrow you'll cry, Meshahayom tischak. In place of today, you're laughing. What did he mean? Was he trying to say something sort of depressive, as if to say, well, don't be too happy today because tomorrow you might cry. No, says Reb Chaim Shmulevitz, the great tragedy of humankind is to only see the here and now, is to only see this moment, this specific situation, without understanding that it is only a branch in a much bigger chain, a much broader picture that has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And it's only, and everything can change from moment to moment, from day to day. Vilna Gaon was saying to his family, you have to always bear in mind that whatever happens today, tomorrow is another day. Tomorrow can change, or can change altogether. There is a famous Gemara in Tanis, which tells the story of a man who was known as Nachum Ish Gamzu. And Nachum Ish Gamzu was called Gamzu because he always used to say Gamzu Latova. This is also for the best. That was what Nachum Ish Gamzu, Gamzu Latova. Whatever happened to him, the Gemara describes terrible things happening. He always says Gamzu Latova, also for the best. Chaim Shmulevitz says, if he had the name Gamzu, Nachum Ish Gamzu, he wasn't called Rav, Rebbe. He was called just Nachum Ish Gamzu, the man who used to say Gamzu. This is also for the best. There must be a title. What is the essence of the title? The essence of the title of the name of Nachum Ish Gamzu is an understanding that he was able not to look at particular situations in life alone. He was able to say, Gamzu, also this, Latova, is for the best. If I link this, if I see it in context, if I see it as Gamzu, as also this, as also something else in context, then I can also understand it's Latova. It makes sense. I'm able to cope with things in a better way. That was the level that Nachum Ish Gamzu was able to achieve. And that too suggests Reb Chaim Shmulevitz that is why Parshas Vayeitzei is stuma. Parshas Vayeitzei has no breaks. There is no break. Why? Because the message, the mission of Yaakov and us by inference as well, is to be able to see every detail joining together in one continuous thread, even though they seem to be disparate events. When we can see things in context, when we see things in life, not in and of just themselves as they are, but part of a broader picture, that is how we have a key tool to cope with the great struggles, the great dilemmas, the questions such as Yaakov is presented with, such as, why is it that I'm finding things so difficult when everything is so smooth for my brother Esau? Everything in his life is easy, and I find things so difficult. And that's how Yaakov is potentially able to cope. And there's one final piece which occurred to me, and that is at the very end of the parsha, the little piece that is not part of the continuous narrative, where there is a break before it, is at the end of the parsha, when Yaakov returns to Eretz Yisrael. It says, Vayome Yaakov, the last pasuk in the parsha, Ka'asher ra'o machaneh Elokim zeh, when he saw them and he saw the malachim coming to greet him, and he says, this is the machaneh Elokim, this is the camp of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Vayikron, he called Shema Makomahu Machanoim. He called that place Machanoim, two camps. Rashi says because it was the camp of Chutz La'aretz and the camp of the outside Israel and the camp of inside Israel, they're coming to meet him. That's Rashi's pshat. But the Ramban, very, very brief Ramban, says something else. Says the Ramban, Machanaim means machanehu u'machanehu elyonim, his camp and the camp in Shomayim, to say that ki machanehu ba'aretz kamachanei hamalachim, his camp in the land of Eretz Yisrael will be like the camp of the Malachim themselves. Kulam machanos elokim, they are all camps of Hashem, mevorachim loi, blessing him, umodim b'yichudai, and agreeing and admitting and understanding the yichud, the unity of Hashem. Perhaps what the Ramban means is that Yaakov has reached a point of understanding that his own machaneh, his camp, his experiences, his life experiences that he has undergone through this entire parsha, he really understands that ultimately it's one and the same as the Machaneh Elokim, as the Machaneh Elyonim, the camp of Hashem. He understands that it's part of that broader plan of Hashem, so that the two camps really become, at this point, when he goes back into the land of Israel, they really become one again. I'd like to share with you one other idea in the time we have remaining. And that is on the Posuk, Perek Lamed, Posuk Lamed Gimel. If you're following inside, we have the parsha of Yaakov's. Yaakov says to Lavan, you owe me a little bit of money. I've worked for you for a long time, and it's time for you to pay my wages. And we know the whole description, how he manages to achieve that, how he manages to. In terms of the sheep, and the sheep are born, everything else. But then there's an unusual posuk. This posuk, Perek Lamed Posuk Lamed Gimel, after he has told Lavan, you remove all of the speckled ones and the colored ones and everything else from the flock, and then we'll see what's left, and then we'll see what transpires. Then he says like this: V'onso bi tzidkosi b'yom machar. He says, my righteousness will answer for me the next day. When I come to request my payment from you. What does that mean? What do those words mean? My righteousness will answer for me. What does that mean? Rashi says, if you suspect me, that I've taken anything that's yours, my righteousness will answer, because my righteousness will come and will itself testify. It will itself testify about all the things that I have acted, the way I've acted correctly, the way I have acted with integrity, because you will not find amongst my flock any of the animals that I said that you should remove. And if you do, then you know that I've stolen them from you. Says Rabbi Yerucham Leibovitz in his Sefer Das Torah, he says that from these words, the idea that my righteousness itself testifies for a person, we learn a very important principle. Introduces it with a Mishnah in Shkolim. The Mishnah describes how someone who is coming to donate to the Beis Hamikdash, or giving the annual donation of the Machatzis HaShekel, half shekel. It's a Mishnah in Shkolim, Perek Gimel, a Mishnah, I think Mishnah based, or otherwise it could be Yerushalmi. He says like this: the Mishnah says you're not allowed to enter with any type of clothing that potentially has a place in it, or is it that looks that a person could either think maybe hide something in, or that is a particularly exquisite, elaborate type of garment. Why? Because perhaps people will say that this is not the person giving. This is actually the Kohanim, when they go and take out the money from the collection. They're sort of gathering it all together. They're counting up what people have given, what people have donated. They have to be very careful. They don't wear any elaborate or expensive type of garments. Why not? Because people should not say that maybe they have increased their own personal wealth through the Trumas HaLishka, through the donations that people have given, right? That's the concern. Someone might say, well, this Kohen today, who's sorting out the donations, who's counting up the donations people have given, you know what? He's wearing really nice clothes. He's probably slipped a few coins in his pocket, and that's how he's been able to afford such nice garments. Says Rabbi Yerucham, he says like this: is there really a concern here? You're talking about the Kohanim. You're talking about Aaron Kohen and his children, the most prominent Kohanim. They're involved in the holiest type of work, and they have to be concerned that someone's going to say, oh, maybe they're slipping some coins into their pocket. Is that really a concern? He brings another example. The Rambam, Paskins, based on a Gemara in Bava Metzia, that it's forbidden to lend money without witnesses. Even a person who's a Talmud Chacham, even a person who's a Torah scholar, you're not allowed to lend money without witnesses, without eating. Why? Is there a real concern? Is there a real concern that they're going to deny two righteous people? Is it really going to happen? Says Rabbi Baruch, the point is like this. It's not about suspicion. It's not about, even if there is a realistic cause for suspicion. It's not that the Chachomim was saying that everyone has to be suspect, even Aaron and Cohen. It's not the point. It is about you. It is about the person themselves, that a person's actions have to be, as far as possible, in a way that is completely clean. It is conducted in the best possible manner, what he calls nikayon, cleanliness, and in a pure way. He says that our actions themselves have to be zahav tahor, pure gold, in the best possible way. That is what being righteous is. It is to be openly righteous, to make sure that there is no possible way that a person could somehow think that something has been done in an improper and an incorrect manner. It is doing the right thing. It is doing the right thing in public and showing and demonstrating that it should look right. It should be right, and it should also look like it's right. That's what it means to be Yosher. We've said many times. Bereshis is Sefer HaYosher. That's what it is. It is the book of the upright. And that is what Yaakov means. When Yaakov says, Va'on sobi tzidkosi, he says, it's not that he's saying, there's whether or not there's a real suspicion. There may not be a real suspicion of Yaakov himself here. That's not the point. He says, I want you to know that my righteousness answers on my behalf. The way I act answers on my behalf. The fact that I've removed all of these animals, and it shows that it's entirely fair what's going on, what I'm doing here. And where do we learn that from? We learn it from Hashem himself. We say on Rosh Hashanah, Aton nigleisa on Har Sinai. You came to us with complete clarity. You revealed yourself to us on Har Sinai. We say that the heavens opened and everyone could see Hashem. They could point and see, Zeh Keli, this is my God. There's no hidden corners. There's no skeletons in cupboards. Everything is clear. It is entirely crystal clear. That effectively was the point that Yaakov here was striving for. Whenever he conducted himself with Lavan, and we know what Lavan was like, the way that Lavan tries to outwit him, Lavan tries to trick him. However and wherever he conducts himself with Lavan, he says like this. I use the phrase that the way Rabbi Yochanan phrases it is like this. He says, "Ani chofetz, I desire dafka ba'ofen kozeh, specifically to do it in this way, so that if you suspect me, as I tovet kosiva on sobi, my righteousness will come and will answer for me. It will stand up and testify in my stead. And that itself, that is the power of Yaakov's words, and it is a demonstration and a lesson for us all that righteousness in life is our greatest asset. If we do the right thing, if we act in the right way, then the righteousness itself goes in front of us. It becomes our greatest ambassador. That's what it means to be and act in a right way, in an upright way, to try and always try our very best and always to do the right thing in the best possible way. That is the Va'on B'Tzid Kosi in the Parsha, and I think with that we are out of time. So I thank you all. Thank you all very much for listening and joining this evening, and I wish you all a very good Shabbos. The intention next week is to once again be able to be in shul both. So both will continue with the hybrid model. We'll be on Zoom as well as for those who would like to and are able to join us in person at shul, which is something I'm certainly very excited about. Take care, have a very good evening, and have a good Shabbos.
Thank you very much.
Good Shabbos.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Shabbos.
Thank you.
Good Shabbos, good Shabbos. Thank you.
Thank you. Good Shabbos.
Good Shabbos, thank you. Take care.